Hi, everybody. Welcome to another
Hi.
episode of the Wheel of Neurodivergent Leadership, PricklyPear's Leadership Wheel. This week, we're going to be talking about empowering and developing others. So excited to be here with our panel, our expert panel. I'm Ken Carlson, and I'm going to pass it right away to Marilyn, who's got a quick example and a quick introduction of herself.
Okay. Hi. Marilyn O'Hearn here. And as we look at empowering and developing others, I think I would also include self in that. And I had a client, a coaching client leader who had scored himself very low on a 360
Mhm.
assessment, and everyone else had scored him high. So as we talked, there was something lingering from growing up, his self-image related
Mm,
to his neurodivergence. He wasn't confident in his communication, especially his written communication, was taking
mm,
way too long to craft emails and was, you know, timid about approaching higher ups. And the organization really saw him as a high potential and wanted to provide some support for him in breaking through that. And,
mm,
I don't think he would have claimed neurodivergence. And I want to make that point because I think that in my 25 years of coaching, this is pretty common, right? That people may or may not know they're neurodivergent. If they do, they may or may not feel comfortable sharing that
mm.
with other people. This we may have an international audience, and so just from a cultural standpoint, I would say like younger generation, US, and a few Northern European countries are more aware of and embracing of the wonderful creativity and
Mm,
focus and the many gifts that neurodivergent leaders can bring. I mean, that's what we want is to have the diversity and to celebrate and leverage that. But that's not a universal thing. So in my
mm,
culturally intelligent approach, I talk about approaching with Ache. So A for awareness, C for curiosity, and that
mm,
includes, tell me something about yourself, what's going on, what do you think's behind the difference
mm,
in these 360 scores? And empathy, that we're
mm,
there, not like this is a terrible thing, but how can
mm.
I best partner with you and understand? And humility. That
Yeah.
Yes, we have some training and some knowledge and some expertise, and everyone I'm just grimacing because there's a
Yeah.
big crash upstairs. Sorry. Uh um
So great.
Recover here for a minute.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious what occurred with this particular person that you are coaching. What occurred in the end for him?
Oh yeah. He had this really creative approach where he had a system set up with his kids where he kept a journal of all their wonderful accomplishments and all the attaboy, attagirls. And he started
Mm,
keeping one for himself. And
mm,
so, and just, you know, kind of updating his self-image, really like, okay, I'm
yeah.
not the same person that I was as a teenager, and I've learned some skills and tools to work around this and that I'm already employing. And, so my kind of identifying his strengths and acknowledge
Hmm.
him for that. And then he had his system himself for acknowledging his own strengths. Then his
Yep.
confidence increased. He was able to uh, lessen the time that he was spending on communication and more confident about reaching out to higher ups, and was promoted
Yeah.
and did a great job of developing others in the
Right.
organization.
Right. So he like developed himself. You helped him empower and develop himself, and that helped him to empower and develop others. Really great
Yeah.
story, Marilyn.
I
Thanks
think
so
he
much
was
for
already
sharing.
pretty good at, had some skills on developing others. It
Hmm.
was the self that where we needed to
Hmm.
start.
Yeah, awesome. Um, Meredith, I'd love to hear you introduce yourself really quickly, if that works.
Absolutely. I'm Meredith Canaan, and I am your differently wired business coach, empowering
Mm,
neurodivergent entrepreneurs to,
mhm,
align their business with their differently wired mind and create marketing and sales strategies that are easy and fun and getting it all done in a way that works for their brains. And so,
awesome.
I have a story that's very similar. I don't know if it's the right place for this, but I had a client who um, that empowering of self made it so much better for empowering other people in the business. He was a director of sales at a technology company, and because of his knowledge and capacity of the product and his technical brain, he'd been with this
Mhm,
tech company for a while. They acquired another company, and so then they had these two competing products for the company. They were trying to choose which ones. And as he started, we created a new kind of next level position for him where he wanted to go. And part of that started working on the communication between the other departments. And so he
mhm,
really got close with the engineers and the product development between both the new product that was acquired and the current product that was there, and really started creating this team in
mm,
how people were communicating and what were the differentiators between the two products and which clients really should they focus on that, because there had been this kind of back and forth between the two departments and like focus on this and focus on this and focus on this, and to really kind of creating that bridge between product development and the sales department and having them all be much more on a page. And so it was kind of similar to what Marilyn was saying, is it's that starting to bring your personal like confidence and development to empower yourself then creates the capacity to empower others. And this guy was a
mm,
really spiritual guy as well. And one of the things
mm,
that we brought to the table was, how was the Judaism and all of the important spiritual practices, how did he bring that into the practices at work? And so
wow.
really cool kind of combination of all these things that came together in a really great way of, him standing in his power and empowering this cross communication between the two teams.
Very cool.
I love
Thanks,
that
Meredith.
tie-in of the spirituality, and that, that was
Mm,
one of the
Yeah.
reasons why that leader selected me as their coach is that
yeah,
we could speak that language. And
great.
so thanks for
Mm,
bringing that in. Great
Oh no, it's funny.
example.
Yeah, this guy actually chose me because I was Jewish and he's very, very Jewish. And I was like, I don't know if you know this, but I converted. My name's, Maiden. He's like, I figured that
yeah,
out from maiden name being O'Brien. And I was like, okay, just
yeah.
check.
Yeah,
That's so great.
that's
So great.
that's great. And
Thanks, Meredith.
Ken, you had an
Yeah.
example too, right?
Yeah, well, let me first go to Petra. I'd like
Okay.
to get her voice in the room here uh, for for a quick introduction of yourself, but also just talking about the competency itself. I imagine you have a quick definition for us or something.
Not really. I was just
Yeah.
really listening to both Marilyn and Meredith, but wanted to just say hello to everyone joining us here today. I'm Petra, executive coach, leadership development specialist, and co-founder of PricklyPear, where we build highly customized leadership journeys and coaching programs for neurodivergent talent and organizations. Wanted to just maybe circle back a little bit of what both of you had mentioned in terms of why is this actually a critical or crucial competency, and what does that look like in leadership? And I love that we started out with leading self before leading others. I think that's something
Mhm.
that is so simple but often forgotten. But also, what does that look like on the other end of the coin, right? What does it look like for a leader who really is trying to leverage the diversity on the team, which includes, as we know, sometimes 10 to 20% of people that are neurodivergent, particularly in
Right.
very engineer high audiences and tech companies. So what I felt like really the word that popped up for me was really inclusive leadership, right? So I think where we start with this is really, what does inclusive leadership look like on a daily? How do we demonstrate that consistently? And how do we, with that, recognize and nurture the unique strengths and really contributions that can be made? And how do we create a culture of what I would call respect and continuous growth, right? Because we all are looking to consistently innovate and give, a cutting edge to where we are with what we do. So what come to mind here is a scenario that just typically happened in my own practice with someone who, a neurodivergent leader who got a promotion and shared with his new boss about his ADHD. And the first thing that fell out of this new boss's mouth was, "Are you going to be able to perform?" And what that brings to light is the biases we all have, right? The thoughts around anything that's different from what we know and how we live and show up, and the immediate assumption underlying. And of course, what we all do as coaches is, try to get into how can this become more of a coach-like approach, right? How can we foster a more coach-like approach as part of our inclusive leadership, and really start recognizing, creating awareness around biases, or when bias is present in our interactions? And how do we, from the get-go, just start the conversation in a different way, right? How do we get more comfortable being uncomfortable talking about and asking and inquiring, and really having some genuine curiosity around, what would that look like? What would support look like for this particular individual on my team, right? How do I find that out? How do I find out more about that particular individual and what their strengths are and where they really can bring in their highest contribution? So that kind of came up or fell into my lap when I listened to both of you. Just returning it back to Ken, I know we have a couple other points we want to cover here, and I know Marilyn has a couple more stories as well.
Absolutely. No, and what I hear you saying, it's like not only just leading downwards and doing inclusive leadership, but it's also how do we lead upwards to help our leaders even create more inclusivity for ourselves or this particular leader. So thank you so much for sharing that story, Petra. I think it deals with, as neurodivergent leaders, what they need to, or what we need to deal with is not just our own judgments about ourselves and our own kind of space that we're in, but also the judgments of society or the judgments of other leaders that we're forced to be with. I mean, we have to deal with our boss, whether they're inclusive leader or not, right? So and there's what we've identified as some key traits and skills for neurodivergent leaders, and one of them Marilyn's already talked about: empathy and emotional intelligence. With her, how do you say that?
Ache, awareness,
Ache.
curiosity,
Awareness,
humility, and empathy.
And empathy. Yeah. And the two other areas that we talked about: adaptability and flexibility, and innovation and creativity. And I'm curious if any of you have any examples of adaptability and flexibility in neurodivergent leaders that you dealt with.
I'd like to go back to the idea that Petra mentioned about inclusive leadership. And I'm just remembering speaking to an HR class, human resources class at a university, about bias and cultural intelligence. And they were saying that, yes, they see the value in diversity and the idea of inclusive and welcoming and belonging type of workplaces where you're actively recruiting for and promoting people with neurodivergent diversity and other diversity. And yet they weren't sure about how to handle it in an interview, how to bring up, like, tell me more about yourself, or, a person where they feel maybe a disconnect emotionally. So maybe somebody on the spectrum, or, a focus type of a situation. And if they're noticing something like that, then how do they bring up what is the support that you need, and without offending the person or crossing a line legally, in the US.
Right.
So that's, I just wanted to bring that forward. Mhm.
And what did you discover in that space? Were you able to help them or help them to
Yes.
create something there?
Yeah. Just, that if we are just naturally curious and can open a discussion without breaking any laws,
Yeah.
then, the person is going to feel heard and understood and welcomed from the very beginning, from the
Mhm.
first interview. Mhm.
You
And
know,
then go ahead,
I,
Meredith.
I think one of the things when you think about that onboarding process, the interviewing process, and all of that stuff,
Mhm.
and it's that curiosity that I think how we phrase the questions to help both empowering the person in the interview, asking questions like, are there specific things that help you function higher at work than, right? Whether they're asking, do you need certain accommodations, right? If we
Mhm.
started having more and more of those open, curious questions to help just bring out the best in everyone and their, I think especially as work situations are changing, more and more people are remote than they used to be. It's easier for people to take care of and handle those things, but it might not have been a conversation that we would have had. And so I think when we have great questions in that onboarding process, with an inclusive type and open-ended curiosity, right? People are more willing to say, oh, I noticed that I work better with a bouncy chair, or I have a kneeling, right? Things
Mhm.
like that give that extra productivity edge that might start leading to understanding it, and whether a person is any type of, marginalized, neurodivergent, et cetera. I think the more we culturally start to create those inclusive onboarding practices, the more we'll see
Mhm.
the empowerment from the very beginning of the relationship inside of that stuff.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah,
about
like
also,
maybe
go ahead. Sorry, Ken.
I was just gonna say maybe a question like, what's the best work environment that makes you most effective?
Yeah.
That's, what's the, what does it look like from a logistical perspective that's most effective for you? And how do you manage what's a way that you manage your time that's more effective?
Mhm.
Not asking the question, hey, are you ADHD? But
Mhm.
asking the question that might help them, like maybe they've created some skills and ways to handle their ADHD in the past, but they can offer the things that make a difference for them without actually having to reveal a neurodivergent diagnosis that they have, as an example.
Yeah. I was thinking also about during the pandemic and the still a lot of people are working home at least several days a week, that certain populations have really liked that, and that now that there is some mandated return to the office at least a couple of days a week, it's okay, if I'm on the spectrum or I'm an extreme introvert, how do I handle the social expectations? Because really,
Hmm.
I'm comfortable going to work. I want to be seen as part of the team, but I'm not comfortable going to bars for a couple of hours, every
Hmm.
night with the team. So how is that kind of a situation handled? And I know in some countries, that's more expected than others, as just well as some teams or some organizations, how that's handled.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's a
Excellent.
great point, Marilyn. I just thought about when you said different cultures, right? I had an engagement with a team in Japan, and that's really what is
Yes, that's
very
what I
much
was thinking of. Yes.
very much on the daily, right? These after hour get-togethers. Yeah, I also I just thought about the idea of making adaptations and work arrangements. I think the big piece here too is, as you said, Meredith, having a good experience from the beginning is really with how much sincerity is this being offered. I think what we're also really dealing with here is particularly in corporate settings, there are oftentimes, very heartfelt initiatives, or, there's a lot about DEI and that actually moved from all the way on the right of the spectrum to all the way to the left of the spectrum, as far as how sincere it's being really implemented in organizations, and what kind of really sincerity is it demonstrated on a daily basis. And I think if we ask somebody, what would it look like for you to be best supported, I think people need to feel comfortable and safe first to actually voice that, and think like whatever they have to say here is actually being taken serious, and there's an intention to really execute on that information. I think we became all very, very much aware, particularly when the diversity and inclusion movements had more light shed on them, and organizations made a bigger effort from that point on forward, that some things were just not meant sincerely enough, right? And people still did not feel included, and they still didn't feel like they mattered, right? And what they needed mattered. So adapting is a huge word, right? Adaptability and flexibility includes a lot of things. I think we touched on a few things here with respect to communication and adjusting, communication style. I think for a lot of the people that I have the privilege to work with, a lot of times it's really about setting clear agendas and setting clear expectations that helps them navigate, well. I think when things get ambiguous, and we always talk about that, right? The complexity in today's work world, and how things get ambiguous and we don't really know. And then if we stay vague, that's when things become really tricky, right? For people that need some clear communication and need some clear expectations set at the outset. Bless you, Marilyn.
Thank you. Thanks.
And of course, the whole idea about, how do we maybe not just accommodate, but also delegate in a way where we enhance efficiency on the team and enhance job satisfaction at the end of the day, right? How do we go about that? And it's all really learning. I think where we started out here today was learning to get more comfortable asking and really navigating spaces that we may not be so comfortable in diving into, and to develop more muscle as leaders to really go, hey, how do I find out more about what really matters here in the situation? How do I hear, again, this is listening, not so much talking, but how do I hear more about how I need to support that individual to really contribute at that exceptionally high level, which most of them, are capable of.
Well, and I think bring it back to what Marilyn was saying with her story at the beginning, right? Having that understanding of the expectations, and then having the, like, I don't remember what you called it, but like the brag jar for the CEO to help build his confidence, to be able to say, oh, I met and or exceeded this expectation, makes it so much easier at the end of the day to feel as an empowered person. A, you know what the expectation is. B, you know how you're delivering on the expectation. And then to remember to reinforce that with those types of brag things, whether you do it on quarterly meetings with managers, et cetera, and how you're like, oh, this is great. And then also collecting all the ones when everybody else is saying something, right? That kind of helps bring the things full circle, so that that you're being empowered, that you're delivering. But it starts with that confidence to ask for the needs, that then builds the confidence to keep asking for more needs, accommodations, et cetera, so that it's that win-win for both, you in satisfaction at the position and what you're delivering, and for the company as a whole, how it all matches both expectations.
Yes, and I wanted to pull out something that I think we've all been referring to. So, out of my past 25 years of working across many cultures with leaders and teams and development, it's, as coaches, we're not coming in, and I know there are people out there that have this kind of a business, like, I'm the dentist coach, or I'm the real estate coach. They specialize in that area, but they maybe some of them a little bit more like a consultant. Here's your 6-step plan for you to have to be successful. And coaching is very individualized, like that 360 assessment that I mentioned earlier with my client had shown where everyone else saw them, which was really high, you know, and then where
Yeah.
they saw themselves, it was low, and there was a discrepancy. So then how do we create this very individualized plan for this person, you know, this high potential leader to step up into their full potential? And that's my vision, is unlocking potential so that we can all live in prosperity and peace.
Yeah. And just the idea, I mean, with what we're doing here today is that coaching makes an impact for
Yes.
neurodivergent leaders, and it makes a difference for everyone. But we're saying it makes a difference for neurodivergent leaders in this space because of these different leadership skills are so critical. But none of us can see ourselves. Neurodivergent leaders can't see themselves either, right? And so to do a 360, to do an assessment, to talk to a coach, to really see, you know, like this one leader that I worked with, you know, he kept everything to himself, and he really cared about his people, but because of, you know, his neurodivergent traits, he tended to, you know, try to do the work of all of his people and himself. And it was through the coaching that he really saw, you know, that there was a gap of what he could do to be more empowering and to develop people even more. And so that's something that showed up because of the coaching, and that's really what we want for, you know, the potential people that we're talking to here today, is that there's an opportunity to really up level their leadership by working with a coach like me or Petra or Marilyn or Meredith. You know, we could really help make a difference for you as a leader.
I love what you just said, Ken, because the movement has to go from both sides, right? So we on both ends, there's got to be better conversations, and I think that's really the key, is really to empower on both ends, right? So if we share more information about what's really going on, we started out saying humility is a big piece here too, right? When it comes to inclusive leadership, I mean, I need to just acknowledge there's things I don't know. And I think the higher we go in the career, the more we see resistance to that, just as an acceptance, right? There's things I don't know. But the other thing I wanted to touch on here real quick is, we talked about the accommodation piece. And I think this is also something where the neurodivergent audience has to be really mindful that, yes, we have preferences. And I know that this work from home, for example, worked well for a lot of the leaders I coached in the neurodivergent space. But they really started to become very, very isolated. And all of a sudden, we no longer had the video on for the virtual meetings, and we just completely disappeared. And I think there's a big chance sometimes for that to happen. And so inclusive leadership, I think, is also this kind of a little bit of guidance. How do I really connect that individual into, and we talked about social anxiety earlier too, how do I reconnect or connect or prevent the disconnects from happening and really integrate that individual into it? There's a little bit, again, learning on both ends, right? How do I feel more comfortable maybe participating more, even though some of that is not necessarily, you know, in my nature or in, you know, how I usually feel comfortable. So how do we, again, come each other's way a little bit, right? And meet maybe halfway is a big point here too, I think.
Well, and I think one thing that's really important about that, especially when it comes to autism and the social anxiety and the things that come with that, I just recently, and this is not necessarily business related, but was trying to understand, my kids got some of this, and as they're on the spectrum, and we were talking about small talk, right? And that whole thing about how small talk's really uncomfortable. And I was like, well, when does it go from being small talk to being something that is deeper? And how do you define that, right? Just like we're saying that it's an individual thing to understand. And they were like, well, we are talking about some things that we both liked. And I was like, common interest, right? It's a great place to understand that was the thing, right? And so it's where the small talk social anxiety can come into play, is the more that we understand, or the individual understands their individual social topics or interests that they could then have to those conversations to get them back out of their shell and things like that, where it's a whole life, right? It's a whole life. As leadership, we have to look at every area of their life, and some of those things make a difference when you bring them back into the workplace, right? We all love the Zelda, right? The common connection with kids was that they loved the video game Zelda, and I can't remember what the other one was, but you know, it's just those things that you're just like, oh, and then it was a meaningful conversation where somebody else might be like, yeah, that's still small talk. But understanding that definition of where connection became a thing as an autistic individual, it was really powerful.
And I think you're speaking to exactly what our next talk is going to be about, Meredith, which is about building relationships and connecting. So we look forward to, just want to close our time. Our half hour is up today, and just thank you so much, Meredith, Marilyn, Petra, for all your comments and the great discussion that we had here today. And a month from now, on the 28th of August, on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, we're going to do this one more time for this leadership wheel. And the topic is the Wheel of Neurodivergent Leadership, building relationships and connecting. And we'd love to talk to you further. We'd love to get, if there's any questions that you have for any of one of us, our email addresses are right here on the screen. Please join us on LinkedIn if you haven't already. Join the discussion in our PricklyPear page, Brain Diverse Leadership Collective. And we'd love to, continue this conversation with you. I know each one of us are willing to spend a half hour, an hour with you just to have a conversation about how we could make a difference for you and your leadership.
And I'm not sure that our emails are they all in view here? Yes. Okay,
They
great.
are.
Okay. I just had my screen a different way. Okay. Great being with you. I'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Yes. Bye, guys.
Let me.
Thanks. Bye-bye.